إن الدين عند الله الإسلام وما اختلف الذين أوتوا الكتاب إلا من بعد ما جاءهم العلم بغيا بينهم ومن يكفر بآيات الله فإن الله سريع الحساب فإن حاجوك فقل أسلمت وجهي لله ومن اتبعن وقل للذين أوتوا الكتاب والأميين أأسلمتم فإن أسلموا فقد اهتدوا وإن تولوا فإنما عليك البلاغ والله بصير بالعباد إن الذين يكفرون بآيات الله ويقتلون النبيين بغير حق ويقتلون الذين يأمرون بالقسط من الناس فبشرهم بعذاب أليم أولئك الذين حبطت أعمالهم في الدنيا والآخرة وما لهم من ناصرين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. We're trying to cover ayahs number 19, inshallah, if Allah wills, all the way to ayah number 22 of the surah in this hour. And what I wanted to start with is a theme that I didn't elaborate enough in the previous discussion. Two items remain outstanding. One of them is Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned La ilaha illa huwa twice in the previous ayah and actually ended the ayah La ilaha illa huwa al-azizu al-hakim. That is an echo from the previous ayat about Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah actually mentions Huwa alladhi yusawwirukum fil arhami kayfa yasha La ilaha illa huwa al-azizu al-hakim. So you recall in the first section of the surah, the exact same phrasing occurred, and now it's being reiterated by Allah. And that's Allah's way of taking you back to a lesson previously taught. That is Allah's way of reminding us of one ayah by another ayah. And Allah Himself says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ. This is how we separate the ayat, also means this is how we explain the ayat. Meaning the Quran starts explaining and unfolding itself, opening itself up. So in the first case, what we learned was that Allah Azza wa Jal, He knows the unseen. And you know nothing. And you have to humble yourself before Allah because you don't have the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal has. And He decides what to teach and what not to teach, what to keep ambiguous and what to let it be known. And He taught us that by way of teaching us, you don't even know what was going on with you in the womb of your mother. He molded you how He wanted. And then He said, and thus He established His authority, La ilaha illa huwa al-azizu al-hakim. He had authority over you, and His wisdom executed how He molded you and fashioned you. And this same authority and wisdom is how He sends revelation. Now we see another dimension of that in this ayah. La ilaha illa huwa al-azizu al-hakim. A new lesson has been taught about that. And that lesson has to do with Allah's justice. Whether you see justice or not, whether you can recognize or appreciate Allah's justice or not, it's always there. And so again, it's another dimension of humility that's being taught. So the same teaching, La ilaha illa huwa al-azizu al-hakim, different dimensions of it get highlighted as the discourse progresses. This is the other, inshallah, when I discuss the structural analysis of the second passage and compare it to the first, I'll probably need a board to show you how things are moving forward. But when I do, one of the things that will become clear is, in the first half of this surah, every time Allah teaches us a main lesson, He ties it to something about Himself. So for example, Allah was teaching us about revelation, but He taught us reminded us of a reality about Himself. He taught us something about how to deal with disbelievers. He'll teach us a reality about Himself. The lessons about Himself keep recurring at strategic points. Because you have to be aware of Allah. Your iman in Allah has to be rejuvenated, and a new dimension of that iman has to be highlighted for you to truly appreciate the lesson at hand. It is as though the iman in Allah enlightens all the other lessons. It actually gives rise to everything else that we learn in the revelation, in Allah's teachings. Right? So, and that is obviously a dominant theme of the Quran. Allah calls all of Islam a tree. Right? The good word is like a good tree. And everybody agrees pretty much that the good word here is La ilaha illallah. The iman in Allah is that seed that gives rise to a good tree, and it has all kinds of branches, all kinds of wisdom, all kinds of lessons, but all of them go back to iman in Allah. The opposite is also true. When someone does shirk with Allah, it's the root of all other evils. Every other evil that happened, like for example, somebody commits murder. What does that have to do with shirk? Well, when someone commits murder and has no regard for a life that Allah created, then they themselves are not bound by the justice Allah set on them. They let something about the faith in Allah left for them to be able to commit that crime. So all crimes, whether they're crimes against Allah, crimes against humanity, crimes against yourself, they have to do with some sort of loss of iman. Small or big, something was missing in our consciousness of Allah when sin occurred. And so we have to come back to Allah and rejuvenate that. The other interesting thing that I wanted to remind myself of is that the faith in Allah is actually essentially called light also. And the purpose of light is to give you the ability to see. So when you have iman in Allah, يَجْعَلَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ. Allah puts a light for him in place that by means of which he can walk. By means of which they can see their way. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us that light. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just the notion of qist. Allah standing by justice, Allah's attribute of being al-qist and al-adl also. Al-adl is one of the names of Allah. Justice itself, manifest, is at the heart of our religion. Actually, the word for our religion, millah is one of the words in Arabic for religion, but the word Allah chose is deen. The word Allah chose is deen. And the word deen is a very powerful term. We'll dig into it a little bit today, and I'll tie it to the notion of justice then. So first, and that's important because in the coming ayah, we're seeing inna deena indallahi al-Islam. The word deen is coming right up, right? So I want you to have a connection made between three terms today that are key. Islam, deen, and qist. Those three things are married to each other. You cannot think of one outside of the other. They are in an embedded relationship with each other. So let's start with the word deen. الدين بالكسر, meaning not dain, but deen. الملة عقيدة لازمة في القلب. It's actually a conviction. Deen is a conviction in language that lies and is rested deep inside the heart. ولا يدينون دين الحق means that they do not find themselves convinced of the religion of truth. الدين بالكسر كذلك الحساب. Deen also, so deen, one meaning of the deen is conviction, something that will rest inside your heart. The other meaning of it is al-hisab, accountability. Accountability. Al-a'mal mu'allaqatun bi ashabiha fi dhammihim kaddayn yus'aluna anha. All deeds that are associated with a consequence. Like the word dain. Dain is a loan. A loan is something that is associated with its consequence, meaning when do you have to pay it back? It's a responsibility. When you get loan money, then you're not like, I got rich. Nobody thinks that. It's not, it comes with a consequence. The payback has to be there. You might be able to use it for a little bit, but the thought that you have to make the payment back is always there. So the idea of dain is associated with deen, and that's why it comes with the meaning of hisab, meaning accountability, a sense of owing something to someone. وَفِيهَا أَيضًا قَهْرُ الْخُضُوعِ لِلْمُحَاسَبَةِ. It actually comes with an overwhelming sense of humility. The word deen actually includes, as a result, an overwhelming sense of humility. Why? Because when you're overpowered by a loan, you're constantly being humbled by it, buried by it, put down by it. The load of it is always on your head. And as a matter of fact, if you see the one you borrowed money from, you avoid eye contact if you're late for a payment, and you're humbled in their presence. The one you owe something to, you're humbled in their presence. So humility comes with the word deen, as does accountability. And which is why Maliki Yawmiddin, the master of the day of, we call it judgment. The judgment is when what we owe will have to be paid. And we'll be humbled before Allah. So those two meanings are embedded inside the word. وَإِبْطَالٌ لِقَوْلِ وَفْدِ نَجْرَانِ لَمَّا طَلَبَ مِنْهُمْ الرَّسُولُ صلى الله عليه وسلم الإسلام أسلمنا قبل ذلك. This is actually said, the first phrase of this ayah is, the deen, as far as Allah is concerned, is Islam. No doubt about it, the deen, meaning the religion that should make its place in people's hearts, and that which should humble people, and that which they should make judgments by. That's the third meaning of deen I didn't mention, كَمَا تَدِينُ تُدَانُ. The way you deal with people, the way you pass judgments on people, how you interact. That's actually part of the meaning of the word deen. By extension, when an entire society deals a certain way, like a person has a way of dealing with people, but a society has a way of dealing with people. When a society has a way of dealing with people, we call it their constitution. Right? That society's constitution is called deen. Which is why in Surah Yusuf, the constitution of the king, which did not allow foreigners to stay in the palace, because Yusuf a.s. wanted to keep his brother in the palace, but he couldn't. Allah said that it wasn't allowed in the deen of the king for him to keep him. Not in it wasn't, deen didn't mean religion in that ayah. It actually meant in the constitution of the king, in the law of the king, the way the king deals, the way his policies, he wasn't allowed to keep his brother, so he had to come up with a scheme to get him arrested to keep him. That was the plan. So deen now means three things. Something settled in your heart, an accountability that leads you to humility, and a way of dealing. And a way, the policy of your behavior, the policy that dictates your behavior. These are the three dimensions of deen. Interestingly enough, the word Madin in Arabic, Madin and Madinatun, not the word Medina like city. The word Medina like city, Arabic students here should know the root letters are Mim, Dal, and Nun. But Madin, this is Mim, you could say Dharfi here, or Mim Idafi here, Idafiya, it's an additional Mim. Madin is used for a slave, a male slave, Madin, and a female slave, Madinatun. Meaning someone who owes everything to their master becomes a Madin. That's the idea behind the word Madin. And this is the term used in the Quran, فَلَوْلَا إِن كُنْتُمْ غَيْرَ مَدِينِينَ تَرْجِعُونَهَا إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. If you don't think you owe anything to Allah, you're not going to be brought back as someone who owes something back to their master. Why don't you just stay alive? When your soul is about to be taken back, Allah says, فَلَوْلَا إِن كُنْتُمْ غَيْرَ مَدِينِينَ. If you're not Madinin, meaning if you don't owe this life back to Allah, why don't you just take it, keep it with yourself, if it's your own? So the word Madin is used in the sense of slavery, which again reinforces the idea of humility. Now, coming back to qist. Allah Azza wa Jal creates us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He established that already when He said He molded you in the wombs of your mothers. Now, to make this complex matter simple, I'll just mention the four dimensions of our unfairness. The four forces that are pulling at us. Easily, everybody can think of at least these four forces. One dimension is, for example, the conflict that will always exist between man and woman. Men think differently, they feel differently, they have different desires than women do. And in a relationship between a man and a woman, there's always going to be some kind of tension. I deserve this, you deserve this. I need this, you need this. And there's always going to have, if you let women decide, they're going to come up with policies that favor who? Women. And if you let men decide, they're obviously going to come up with policies that favor men. In a household, you have to have some sort of compromises and figure things out together and all of that. Why? Because either side can't decide for the other because they can't think or feel like the other. I'll give you a simple example of that, like in a divorce court, right? The judge is passing a verdict between a man and a woman that are getting divorced. But let's say the judge is a woman and she just got a divorce a month ago, right? When she sees the guy, she doesn't see that guy. What does she see? She sees her ex-husband who she didn't get to burn enough. So this guy is getting the gauntlet but human beings can't help but be within their skin. You can't outgrow your skin. You are who you are. You have your biases and you can't help that. We can't be completely unbiased. I can't feel for someone else the way they feel. It's impossible. There are certain emotions we can't understand. Women can't sympathize with your temptations, your emotions, or your temperament. They can't because Allah didn't give them the ability to feel that. The same way He didn't give you the ability to feel what they feel. The point is, let's put it in simple terms. When I used to explain this to my third grade class, back in the day, we had in an Islamic school, there were boys and girls in the class, right? So I said, okay, we limited resources. We didn't even have a playground. So I theoretically came up with a policy, okay, one day of the week, some days of the week, the boys will have recess. And other days of the week, the girls will have recess. And the rest of you have to stay in class. But I'll let the girls decide how many days the girls get, how many days the boys get. Who gets 3 and who gets 2? Guess what the girls decided benevolently? 3 for girls, 2 for boys. Oh, you know what? No, let me just get the boys to decide. They said 5 and 0. The idea is we can't pass judgment completely fairly. We're incapable of that. There are some matters in which we are incapable. And so, there has to be a third party that is neither biased towards men nor biased towards women that has to make a judgment. But that's humanly impossible. Because humanly speaking, either the one judging is a man or a woman. Or then you say, okay, let's come up with a panel of men and women that will judge. Well, they're also going to have the same fight that the two people that are having the issue are having. The only one who can make fair judgments about certain issues that human beings could never have resolved themselves could have been someone who's ultimately just, created both of them, loves both of them the same, and who's the only one who can do that? It's Allah Azza wa Jalla. Only His fairness is possible. Only He can actually execute qist in that way. No one else can. Otherwise, this conflict will remain. Otherwise, that conflict continues. And actually, when He gives that conflict, it is only fair that you completely submit yourself to His judgment, because His judgment is perfect, and that's where the word Islam comes from. And the word Islam, then, of course, the way in which we submit, you can begrudgingly submit. You can reluctantly give in to the judges. You know, I used to watch a lot of Judge Judy when I was younger. You know, when she owns somebody and then they interview him outside, hey, you got owned, how do you feel? Well, I didn't think she was fair at all. She didn't listen to me. And, you know, like, they have that interview outside, right? Well, when He passes a judgment, you gotta humble yourself. What's the term that Allah used for humility here? Deen. Deen. Inna deena indallahi Islam. You have to submit. You owe this to Allah. You have given this up to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So Deen and Islam are sort of interrelated along with qist. Like, this is the embedded relationship between all three. So the first conflict I mentioned was between men and women. You can call it the social tension that's always existed in humanity, right? And it's not just between husband and wife. It's between, in-laws and daughter-in-laws, or, a father and his sons and his daughters. And, there's an imbalance all the time, right? That is a tension all the time that has to be dealt with. The other kind of imbalance, the tension that exists, that's always existed in humanity, is between the employer and the employee. What you can call in more intelligent, more academic terms, capital and labor. Right? So people who make the money and people who work for them. Right? People who have the business and people who work for them. Well, if you let the employees decide, we'll put it in simple terms, if you let the employees decide how many days off should we get and how many days should we work? What should be our benefits? What should be our salary? And what should be our hours for work? Well, if you let employees decide all of that, they're going to say, we'll work 3 hours a week and we'll have, 6.5 days off, and we should get our salaries doubled every other weekend. Or what, employees can run amok. And if they do, the business is gone. You understand? Employees want more benefits, less work. If you let employers decide everything, what are employers going to do? They're basically going to turn employees into slaves. You're going to work for me, forget 7 days a week, 7 days and nights. And I might pay you if I feel like it. And what do you mean benefits? The fact that you're working here is a benefit enough. I'm reminded one time, oh man, what a juicy story. I'm reminded one time when I was pretty young, I started looking for a job when I was in high school. I couldn't find a job anywhere. Couldn't find a job anywhere. And I went to this desi grocery store in New York to look for a job. And the guy said, yeah, I'll hire you. I was like, yes. And this is very long ago. So the minimum wage at the time was $4.25 an hour. Okay? Just letting you know. Okay. So you can look that up historically. So I was in 10th grade. I got the job. I'm super happy that I got the job. And this guy makes me carry bags of rice and onions. And I'm smelling all kinds of fun things. And the basement hasn't been cleaned forever, and he's making me sweep the basement. 10 hours of back-breaking work. I've never done work like this in my entire life. And I'm about to go home. He goes, it's time to pay you. I was like, yeah. Okay. I thought you get a paycheck at the end, but okay, if you want to pay me, I'll pay you cash. I was like, okay, pay me cash. He gives me $20. And I was like, but I work 10 hours. He goes, yeah, we pay $2 an hour. I was like, no, but minimum wage is $4.25. And he said, what, you're illegal? All the other employees he had were basically slave labor because they're illegal, so he gets to pay them less than half of what the law says. That's slavery. I actually threw the $20 bill at his face and walked away. I missed those $20, but still. But the point is, when you let capital decide, then they take advantage of the worker or no? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so this tension has always been there. And there are companies in which, for example, the labor union runs amok and they want raises and the company goes bankrupt. The business can't survive because you can't just keep paying employees and not make any money. And so this tension between capital and labor, how do you deal with money matters? How do you pay? How do you pay wages? How do you do investments? What do you invest in? What do you not invest in? That's just one example of the money tension, but financial conflicts have always been there. And they're always going to be there around the world. They might even be there inside your office. Why did this one get a raise? Why didn't I get a raise? It'll happen. Right? That tension will always be there. And so some of those matters that could not have been solved by human beings, because if at the end of the day, if you ask capital to judge, they'll favor capital. If you ask labor to judge, they'll favor labor. And you get an outside party, they look at their back experience and they either lean towards capital or they lean towards labor. That judgment can only have, some judgments can only have come from Allah. They could only have come from Allah. In matters of how do you deal justly in these sorts of things. Similarly, the verdicts that come between governments and people on a larger scale. Governments, if you let governments decide everything, then governments want you to pay more taxes. They want more control. They want less and less freedom for you, because they want everything that empowers governments more. If you let people decide everything, guess what people say? We don't want to pay any taxes. What do we have to pay? We want all the services and none of the taxes. Right? The government says we want all of the expenses for us paid for from the people and the military and all this other stuff. But at the same time, we can't give people too much freedom because they'll run amok, they'll destroy society. Now this tension, of course, to this day between government and people exists. What is the right balance between government and people? Between the hakim and the mahkum? Around the world. In a single village. In a country, in a village, in a city, in a neighborhood. This tension exists between power, those in control, those in authority, and those who are under authority. And it's not just about government at the highest constitutional level. It could be the governance of a masjid. It could be the governance of an organization. It could be the governance of a student group. Leadership versus followers. There's always some kind of tension, right? These tensions have existed. And of course, the most powerful tension of them all, of all of these, at the root of all of them is one conflict. And that conflict is the two dimensions of our own existence. Allah Azza wa Jal made us a physical being. يُصَوِّرُكُمْ فِي الْأَرْحَامِ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ is an indication, is a kind of a slight subtle hint towards that. He said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَخْفَى عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. Right? Neither in the earth nor in the sky, nothing is hidden from Allah. In the same ayah, He said He made you in the wombs of your mothers. What does the earth and the sky have to do with the womb of the mother? Well, inside the womb of the mother, there's some material that is entirely from the earth. And there's also some material that came from the sky. There's a spiritual side of us, and there's a material, physical side of us. The material side of us has emotional needs. The material side of us has, bodily needs. It has social needs. These are all from the material world. The spiritual side of us needs to connect with Allah Azza wa Jal. And there's a tension between those two things. Sometimes what you physically want is something that will violate your faith. There's going to be a tension between those two things. It's going to be you're being torn from the inside. Do I listen to the needs of my iman, or do I listen to the needs of my nafs? It's going to happen inside you. And Allah did not give you your nafs so you can suffocate it. Allah did not give you desires so you can't fulfill them. Like for the Christians who felt all desires are evil. All temptation is evil. رَهْبَانِيَةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. They invented the monastery life. They came up with the monastery life. Why? Because we can't possibly violate our faith, so we have to shun all temptation. We have to shun all temptation. Allah says, فَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. They weren't able to keep up with that, because that's not how you're wired. Human beings aren't wired that way. If you deny the natural human desires and inclinations that Allah put inside you, then it's going to get messed up in some way. And I don't have to spell out to you what happened in the church and what still happens in the church, because that's denied, right? But on the other side, what Allah does, only Allah can do this. How do you make sure that you don't violate your soul, in a matter of speaking, and you don't violate the needs of your physical, emotional, material, worldly needs? How do you balance between those two? Well, the only one who can truly balance those two is the one who made both of them, who understands the needs of both of them, who can create a harmony between both of them. So when you take care of one, you're actually also taking care of the other. When you're taking care of the other, you're also taking care of one. This is the beauty of Islam. In what other religion can someone say, when a man is intimate with his wife, it's an act of ibadah? Like, how does that make any sense? How in the world does that make any sense? When somebody goes and earns a halal income, they're making money, and everybody, halal or whatever, the world doesn't know the difference between halal and haram. When somebody's going and getting a decent job and making money and providing for their family, they're doing sadaqah. They're earning good deeds. No, they're putting food in their own mouth. They're putting food in the mouth of their child. Allah calls it sadaqah. The Prophet calls it sadaqah, alayhi salatu wasalam. How? Why? When you're smiling at someone, you're being social and doing socially acceptable behavior. You're making friends. That's a normal thing people do. But when you do it out of a genuine love and sincerity towards others, this ibtisam in the face of your brother, this smiling in the face of your brother becomes a charity. In other words, things you do in this life for what seems entirely worldly purposes also become some things that have spiritual benefits in them. I mean, guys say this all the time, like, I want to marry for the sake of Islam. No, you don't. Okay? Let's be real. But the nikah is half your deen. It's from the sunnah of the Prophet. It's an act of worship. Like, nobody's having spiritual experience the day they get married. They're like, you know. But their head is somewhere else. But that is an act, that's spiritual. The most spiritual act that we do in our life is Hajj. That's the most spiritual act. This is the time where you're supposed to forget this world's existence. And what does Allah say? لَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَبْتَغُوا فَضْلًا مِّن رَبِّكُمْ فَإِذَا فَضْتُم مِّن عَرَفَاتٍ. There's no harm. If you're going to go do Hajj, take some goods with you to sell, make some money there too, it's okay. What? This is supposed to be a spiritual journey, not a material one. And Allah says, no, go make business contacts. Go, it's okay. When you're done with Arafat, then come back. You know. But in the meantime, yeah, and you see people selling things. Back in the day, it was the Hujjaj selling things. Not just people that come there just to sell things. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَبْتَغُوا فَضْلًا مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. It's remarkable. Which is why we learn, in the most spiritual of moments, we're going around the Kaaba, and we get to Rukn al-Yamani, and we say what? رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. That's the power of our deen. That's the justice of our deen. It's not a spiritual faith that denies this world, nor is it a material faith that denies spirituality. It merges the two in the most beautiful, harmonious way. It merges those two. And it creates that fairness that only Allah Azza wa Jal can create. Now, this harmony that Allah Azza wa Jal taught us, that He gave us, this is what's being talked about in the coming ayat. The word justice, which is Allah always stands by justice, we learned that. قَائِمًا بِالْقِسْطِ. He always stands by justice, and those who truly know Allah is always fair. When Allah is always fair, He sent a religion that is based on His fairness. That's the idea. And so Allah has always, all human beings have always been inclined towards justice and fairness. You know that, right? If you read books on international ethics, you'll find some interesting anthropological realities. Like across societies in the world, one of the themes that is dominant in every society's framework is their desire to create a just society. Whatever society it is. Even the pharaohs, in their head, twisted enough, thought that they're creating some form of a just society. They had twisted basis, but conceptually they thought this is how we get to justice. Every society pushes towards it. And when injustice increases enough, then that nation gets pushed out. There are revolutions, there are fightbacks, and a new nation is formed. And when you see that new nation coming together, and the call for that new nation being formed come together, guess what words are thrown out all the time? Justice, justice, justice. When there's a re-election happening, when there's a campaign happening against the current administration, then the words justice are going to get thrown. Why? Because that resonates with human nature. And Allah is saying, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the deen that embodies justice, always has embodied justice, always has embodied that fairness and that balance, is actually Islam all along. Inna deena indallahi al-Islam. No doubt about it, the religion with Allah, the acceptable religion with Allah, has always been Islam. And Islam here doesn't just mean the ism alam, like some ulama have commented, that this is not only ism alam, meaning the particular name of the religion, Islam. But in addition to that, it's referring to the concept of submitting before Allah's fair verdict. To giving yourself up to be in a state of peace by being at peace with Allah's verdicts. That's always been the religion true with Allah Azza wa Jal. These ayat, now we're about to enter the territory of the ayat that deal with the Christian community that came from Najran to meet with the Prophet ﷺ. Some say about 60 or 70 people came, a delegation of them, to meet with the Prophet ﷺ, to basically tell him what they believe, and they heard that he's got a claim to be a prophet, so they had a two-part agenda. One, they wanted to hear from the Prophet. Two, they said, well, if this man claims to believe in God and is preaching religion, maybe we should tell him about Jesus, he'll join our team. So this is kind of their hope too. So they came for this purpose to preach also. So when they came to the Prophet, in one narration, جاءوا المسجد النبوي تكلم السيد والعاقب فقال لهما their leader spoke, and the Prophet ﷺ addressed them, and he said, Aslima, accept Islam. Submit yourselves, both of you. The Sayyid al-Aqib, the two of them, accept Islam. قَالَ قَدْ أَسْلَمْنَا قَبْلَكَ. Oh no, we already had Islam. They responded to him, we already submitted to God. So they don't mean we're Muslim in the sense that you and I think the label Muslim versus Christian versus Jew. That's not what we're thinking about here. They're saying, oh, you're saying be in service to Allah submissively, serve God submissively, and give yourself up before God? We already do. Oh, we already servants of God. Aslamna, qabla dhalik. And the Prophet ﷺ explicitly told them, kadhabtuma. You're both lying. That's not true. You haven't submitted yourselves to God. يَمْنَعُكُمَا مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ دُعَاؤُكُمَا لِلَّهِ وَلَدًا. You calling on God having a son is what prevents you from submitting to God. It's a profound statement by the Prophet ﷺ. He's not just saying, because you believe God has a son, you're not Muslim. Take a step back. He's saying you haven't submitted to Allah because you've put a son in place for God. Why? Because that son did all the submitting that had to be done. He sacrificed himself. I don't have to submit myself now. I just have to believe and I'm good enough. I don't have to humble myself. My sins are paid for. This is what prevents you from truly submitting to Allah. Truly giving yourself up. A profound one-liner from the Prophet ﷺ, just at the heart of the psyche of their religion. وَعِبَادَتُكُمَا الصَّلِيبِ. And what you really worship is the cross. That doesn't mean they worship. They could respond and say, well, no, we don't worship the cross. We worship Jesus. We worship the Lord. We worship the Holy Trinity, etc., etc. We don't worship the cross. But the Prophet ﷺ is getting at the heart of the problem. It is that sacrifice you believe He made that defines your entire worship. Your notion of salvation and what you owe to God, all of that comes from that cross. وَعِبَادَتُكُمَا الصَّلِيبِ نَاسَبَ أَنْ يُنَوِّهَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ بِالْإِسْلَامِ. And when they said this, then, according to some narrations, this ayah came. إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. No doubt the religion, as far as Allah is concerned, is actual submission. Is actual submission. So it's a declaration to the people of the book. Again, it's building up from the notion of justice. It's building up from that notion. And of course, by now the world knew the kind of injustices that were being done in the name of Jesus around the world. The empires that were now claiming to be the proponents of the faith of Isa alayhi salam have done all kinds of atrocities by now. How are they associated with justice? You know, the early Muslims, as Islam spread, before the word of Islam would spread, the justice of Islam would spread. People would know how Muslims do business. Entire communities would just accept Islam because of the way our tujar were, because of our traders and how they carried themselves. They saw a submission to justice because of our humility to Allah that they haven't seen anywhere else. They just haven't seen it. You know, Professor Gerald Dirk's story I'm reminded of just on this notion. You know, he was a deacon minister. He's knowledgeable in the Christian faith, PhD in theology out of Harvard. I mean, he's not a joke. He knows his stuff. And his sermons in Colorado were heard by thousands, every weekend. And he used to go to this grocery store. This Muslim guy had a mom and pop shop grocery store, Arab guy. And he went there. Thank God it was the right kind of guy. But, well, he goes to the grocery store and he gets groceries. And, they have these controllers come from the state that check your weighing scales. Because the scales have a margin of error when you sell groceries. When you sell potatoes and tomatoes or whatever, it could be 0.5% off, right? Because no scale is going to be absolutely perfect, right? If you've done this kind of groceries in Pakistan, India, or whatever, they put those weights on one side, and they put the groceries on the other side, and before it settles, they pick it up and give it to you. It's still swinging right now. Like, which way does it go? No, yes, enough. Let's go. Right? So what they do in the state is you have a 5% margin of error favoring the seller. In other words, the seller is allowed to sell 5% less than what he charged. There's a allowable margin of error. And so the guy was adjusting the scale saying, well, you're within 5%, so you're okay. The state person happened to be there when he was doing groceries. And the shopkeeper told him, actually, I'd like you to make it 5% against me, not 5% in my favor. And he said, why? The state allows it. He goes, yeah, the state does, God doesn't. SubhanAllah. And he was just in shock, like, why is he so conscious of, like, why his sense of justice in front of Allah is so strong? And this is what made him curious about Islam. This is what started his curiosity into Islam. Subhanallah. What a profound thing. Just the sense of justice from a Muslim. This is, I remind you of, وَالسَّمَاءَ وَوَضَعَهَا, وَالسَّمَاءَ, what's the ayah? رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. The sky, He elevated it, and He placed a scale, a balance in the sky. And Allah put that balance in the sky. In the next ayah He says, أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. So you don't violate scales. So when you establish the scale, you do it with justice. وَزِنُوا بِالْقِسْطَاسِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ وَأَحْسَنُ تَأْوِيلًا. Fairness, justice is at the heart of this deen, and that's what we have to submit ourselves to. Now, before I go into the ayat and the textual, man, the hour's already gone. How did that happen? But anyway, this phrase, I have to do 4 ayat today. But I guess this has to be talked about. It's important. So I'll tell you what happened with Banu Israel was their commitment to the law of Islam became very harsh. The laws. This is halal, this is haram, this is the regulation. Can I get a fatwa for this? And they would do that to the letter. About clothing, about eating, about worship, about the times, about the purification acts, the rituals. Very strict. Very, very strict. But as they were becoming super strict about that, they allowed the biggest injustices to happen. At the same time. You're super conservative about the rituals, but you're completely liberal when it comes to injustice in the family. Lying, cheating, stealing, not giving the money, not paying the wages fairly, treating someone, unkindly, hiding testimony, all this other stuff, no problem. No problem. And you would think that this was an ancient problem of the Jews. We would never have this problem. Like we would never get in the ummah of Islam people that are very apparently religious. On the outside, all the adhkar are there, all the appearances are there, all the adherence to fiqh is there, all the nitty gritty, what ingredient is there in the ice cream? I need to know if it's halal ingredients or haram ingredients. I need to know what is this chemical here because it came from this factory and that factory is next to a pig farm. There must have been some osmosis. I will not have this ice cream, etc. There are people like that. And these are the same people who haven't even given their wife her mahar yet. These are the same people that are okay with investing in a liquor store. How? How are you so worried about halal chicken and so much haram money you're making at the same time? And that's completely fine with you. This dichotomy did exist. And this is actually a violation of Islam because Islam, why am I bringing this up now? Because Islam at its heart is justice. At its core is justice within yourself, with the people around you, justice to Allah. Because Allah Himself, qa'iban bil qist. Inna deena indallahi al-Islam. The other, just a couple of highlights about this opening of the ayah. Allah is making a profound statement. Allah, the creator of all humanity. Allah, the creator of all nations, all ethnicities, all societies, all languages. We don't know what prophets Allah sent to the Aborigines people. We don't know who Allah sent in the depths of some village in Africa. We don't know. We don't know who Allah sent to some island in Malaysia. Allah sent someone 10,000 years ago, we wouldn't know about it. 5,000 years ago, we wouldn't know about it. Allah says, there are prophets I told you about, there are prophets I didn't tell you about. But Allah is telling us one thing. No matter where humanity has existed, Allah did not leave humanity without guidance. Number one, Allah never left humanity without guidance. And whenever Allah sent guidance, the guidance was always the same, which is what? Islam. It was always Islam. Maybe not Islam the word, but submission to Allah's justice, always. That longing inside of a human being that says, something in me says this isn't right. Allah put an automatic justice meter inside of us that's connected to Him, an-nafsul lawwama. He put that inside of us so we would be inclined towards Islam on our own. We'd be programmed to find Islam on our own, no matter where human beings existed in the world. Inna deena indallahi al-Islam is a universal, profound statement. All human beings, actually, no matter where they were raised, what society they belong to, Allah put Islam inside of them, and that is what Allah Azza wa Jal has always wanted for humanity. As far as Allah is concerned, that's the only religion, true religion there is. That's the only real way of dealing with people. That's the only deen worthy of submission. The other beautiful thing about this ayah is the word Islam is actually the name of the religion too. There are two names of the religion, Iman and Islam, actually. This is why the one who accepts Islam can be called a Muslim and also be called a mu'min. Both terms are used. Okay? And which is why even in the later part of the surah, there's a muradafa between Islam and Iman. Here we're being called to Islam. At the end, yunadi lil iman. The Prophet calls to iman. Instead of saying the Prophet calls to Islam, because they're interchangeable names, faith and submission. Why is that important to know? Iman highlights the submission on the inside. Islam highlights the submission on the outside. Justice is executed on the outside. The context of this passage is justice on the outside. So Islam is the appropriate term here. Inna dina indallahi al-Islam. Submit yourselves, give yourselves up. There's something going on the inside. What is that? Iman. So what goes on inside leads to what happens outside. Iman inside results in Islam outside. It's al-ina'u bima fihi yandahu. That's what this is. A container gives out what it contains. When Iman, lightens up, then it pours itself out. It's kind of like the parallel of the lamp that Allah gives. When a lamp is lit, its light doesn't stay inside, it comes out. It extends, right? So Islam doesn't stay inside the heart, it comes out. It declares itself and illuminates its surroundings. So that's inna dina indallahi al-Islam. But then within those, nations and nations of people, and by the way, one of the side readings of this ayah, interesting ayah, Al-Kisai, rahimahullah, he used to read this ayah, anna ad-dina indallahi al-Islam, not inna ad-dina indallahi al-Islam. He read anna. Why? Shahidallahu anna ad-dina indallahi al-Islam. From before. Shahidallahu annahu la ilaha illa huwa wal malaika wa ulul ilm qa'iman bil qist. Shahidallahu anna ad-dina indallahi al-Islam. Badalun min annahu la ilaha illa huwa. Meaning Allah Himself declares that the deen with Allah is Islam. Just like Allah Himself declares He's always standing by justice. Now in that reading, what has happened? Justice and Islam have been made interchangeable. Because of the anna, then justice and Islam become interchangeable. They're two sides of the same coin, and that's the purpose of badal in the Arabic language, right? So that's also a consistent reading of the Quran. وَالدِّينُ حَقِيقَتُهُ فِي الْأَصْلِ الْجَزَاء. That's the last bit for today. The essence of deen, the essence of all of the meanings of deen at the end all have to do with compensation. They have to do with consequence of action. That's what deen is. Which is why the phrase in Arabic, كَمَا تَدِينُ تُدَانُ, how you deal is how you shall be dealt with. Your dealing shall lead to certain reactions, certain consequences on you. Everything we do, in any religion by the way, people are hoping for a return on their investment. People are going to go, put like chocolate milk in front of the Buddha statue or whatever else. Why? Because they need a promotion. They need some return on that investment. I want something back. I'm going to go pray because I need healing. I went to a Joel Osteen thing. I did, yeah. It was pretty cool. It was in Dallas. It was at the American Airlines Center. It was packed. It was like a basketball game. It was packed. And it's a show. I mean, these guys put on a show, okay? And people are just sitting there and I couldn't afford the full-on seats. I was all the way in the back in the bleachers, right? And he had his mom speak, he had his wife speak, and he had people come in to sing in the middle, and I just wanted to see, what is this? What do they do? What is it that they do? Why are people so drawn to this? And you know what I saw? Well, one thing. This was a couple of Christmases ago. This was like a Christmas special in Dallas, is what he was doing. I went to see it, and you know what I learned? I learned that they teach people that if you pray, Allah will make your worldly life better. There was no conversation about the next life. None. The only conversation there was, his mom came on and said, I was diagnosed with cancer 20 years ago, and they told me I got 6 months, and I said, Jesus, I want 20 years. No, make it 30. And then she's like, it's been 30 years. And everyone's like, yes! This is what it was. And he came out and made all kinds of promises to people. This year, you're going to come back to Jesus and your money problems are going to be taken care of. And people said next to me, yes, they are. Yes, they are. This is my year. How is he making those promises on behalf of Allah? What risk will come, what risk won't come? Because the notion of deen in the minds of people is, when I do something for Allah, Allah will do something for me. We have the same concept. We do. But we know one thing for sure. Allah decides what He will do and when He will do. But one thing guaranteed. I may not get in this dunya, but I know one thing. When I worship Allah sincerely, I will absolutely get when? In the akhirah. I will absolutely get what is deserved, what is owed. in the afterlife, there is nothing that's going to be missing from the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. Which is why the word deen is one of the core names of the Day of Judgment. Yawmuddin. It's the day where everything you did in the deen of Islam sees its fruit on Yawmuddin.Ose two terms are married to each other. So now, with that in mind, Allah gave this message to the both Jewish and Christian communities. That's a long discussion, the rest of this ayah. How is it that this ayah has two prongs? I'll just introduce that to you. We'll reinforce that tomorrow, inshallah. And that is that, when Allah is going to talk in these ayat, He's going to give a subtle undercurrent of the movement of Isa, alayhi salam. Isa alayhi salam, when he came, so I'll set that stage for you now. We can discuss it in light of these ayat, the subtext of these ayat today, and the ayat themselves tomorrow, inshallah. So what happened with Isa alayhi salam is he came, and basically you can call his message a resistance movement. He challenged authority. And he was politically incorrect. I mean, he just went after the corrupt ulama of Bani Israel. He called out their injustices. He showed how what they call Islam is just a bunch of injustices. And that cannot be attributed to Allah. And then he would highlight their corruptions, one after the other, what changes they made to the Book of Allah, why they made those changes, what greed led them to make those changes, what power struggles made them to make those changes, and how they're the people that, they are the custodians of the religion, the scholars of the Israelites. They're just a bunch of power-hungry, greedy, self-serving individuals that have no one's interest in mind but their own. And he would call them out, consistently calling them out. Now, in talking about that, in indirect language in the beginning, then it'll become more open later on. In these ayat, it's indirect, the ones we're about to read. When it's indirect, a Christian who listens to this says, wow, these people are like on Jesus' side. Because if the Quran is talking about those who stood up against that kind of injustice, the Christian who has loyalties to Isa alayhi salam says, this sounds like something that Jesus was doing. You understand? So it's like, is this book Team Jesus? Is that what's happening here? So there's a kind of a loyalty being established to the cause of Isa alayhi salam. That loyalty is being established. At the same time, there's a criticism being made of the Israelites. The Israelites, Banu Israel, the Jewish community, are dead against Isa alayhi salam. They say the most horrible things about Isa alayhi salam. And they're the ones who campaigned against him. So at the same time, it's softening the hearts of the Christians, these ayat. And at the same time, it's actually taking a very tough stance against the Jewish community. Who, if they're going to follow the ways of their ancestors, what their ancestors did with Isa, they're now going to do with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you're no different. Then you are no different. And in that way, in this subtle and beautiful way, Allah is actually opening the door to the people of the book, especially the Nasara who have come to open that door to the da'wah to Islam. So he's going to talk about that struggle that the Christians can absolutely relate with, because the most important events to the Christians are the life and times of Jesus and his struggles and what led to his execution according to them. And so there's a subtle reference to those, and actually you'll see not so subtle, actually, as we get into these ayat. And the most beautiful thing about that is he starts with, well, that's always been submission. Inna dina indallahi al-Islam. So when the Christians came and told him, no, we already submit to God. And he says, well, the submission of Jesus was a little different. This is what it looked like. How come yours doesn't look like that? Right? So that's the message that's being communicated to that audience. So we'll discuss that in depth, inshallah ta'ala, tomorrow. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.